Good afternoon, Year 4. We're going to be doing our history lesson now, our next history lesson, learning about the Celts today. So I'm going to share my screen with you. Okay, so if you could write down today's learning objective, which is to investigate the Celts. Now, hopefully at the end of today's lesson, you'll have been able to understand some key characteristics of this period, and you'll be able to extract simple information or more detailed information from the evidence provided. Hopefully you'll be quite confident in understanding today the difference between today and the period being studied. And you'll probably realise by the end of today that not everyone in the past lived the same way, so there might be contrasts between rich and poor. Okay, so let's start off by looking at a timeline. Now, we're going to be looking at the Celtic people today. And the Celtic people, whilst they still do live in Britain today, the period of history that we're going to be looking at goes back thousands of years. It goes back all to this time here, before the birth of Christ. Okay, so if we start our calendar from the year 0, and if nowadays we're living in 2021, that's 2020 or 2021, that was 2021 years ago. So the Celts lived before this and a little bit after it. So they lived in the years that we now call BC, before Christ. And they also, we're going to look at them when they lived in the part of the history called AD, which means Anno Domini, which means in the year of our Lord. So the Celts lived a long time ago. So the history we're learning about today is over 2,000 years old. Okay, so the evidence we're going to be looking at will be a bit of a mixture today. So let's find out a little bit more about the Celts. So who were the Celts? So they are called the Iron Age people, the Celts, and they lived in Britain and Ireland from 750 BC, so that's 750 years before Jesus was born, until 43 AD. And they came from all over Europe, from Austria and Switzerland to southern France and Spain. The word Celt comes from the Greek word Keltoi, although its definition is unclear. The Celts wouldn't have called themselves Celts, it's what other people called them. 750 BC means the Celts were in Britain 750 years before Jesus was born. Okay. Now we're going to be looking at evidence today. Now remember, we've said lots of times in our history lessons that being a historian is like being a detective. We have to look at clues from the past, don't we? And to find out what those clues tell us about the past. Now we can divide our evidence or our clues up into two types. There's primary evidence and secondary evidence. Now, primary evidence comes from at the time of the event. That means that this bit of writing here was written, not typed up, but written all those years ago when the Celts were actually in Britain. Okay, so it's thousands of years old, this bit of evidence. It is a piece of primary evidence. This bit of evidence, however, was made quite recently. It comes from a history textbook. So this is secondary evidence. It was made long after the actual event. You're going to be looking at a bit of a mixture today, and you don't need to decide if it's primary or secondary. That's just there for your information. Now, both these bits of evidence tell us about the Celts. Why don't we pause the video now and have a look at what these bits of evidence tell us? Okay, well done. Now, hopefully you've had a really good look. Let's start off with our secondary piece of evidence. Now, this bit of evidence tells us about what Celtic people looked like all those years ago. Look at the type of clothes they're wearing. It's very different to our modern clothes. You'll notice that they wear these long cloaks that are made out of what looks like tartan material. I'm guessing, I'm using my detective thinking now, that material is probably quite woolen. It's quite thick and quite heavy. And it would be natural material, hasn't been made using a machine. It's probably come from animals, from sheep. Look at their hair. Look at this man here, he's got a moustache. We'll come to that a bit later. And we can tell these people have pale skin. So this evidence tells us a little bit about what the Celtic people looked like. This bit of evidence also tells us a little bit about what Celtic people look like. Let's read it together. Now, this man here was a Roman historian, And he said this about the Celts when he saw them. He said, they are very tall in stature with rippling muscles under clear white skin. Their hair is blonde, but not naturally so. They bleach it, to this day artificially washing it in lime and combing it back from their foreheads. They look like wood demons, their hair thick and shaggy like a horse's mane. Some of them are clean shaven, but others, especially those of high rank, shave their cheeks but leave a moustache that covers the whole mouth. Ah, that's interesting. This Roman historian has got quite a lot of opinions, hasn't he, about the Celts? He tells us they have rippling muscles, which means he thinks they're strong. He says that they bleached their hair, but it makes them look like wood demons. I think he's trying to say they look a bit scary. I think also he's saying that there is definitely people of high rank. Now remember what our word is, when we talk about rank, it is a hierarchy, isn't there? So he's saying that the people at the top of the hierarchy, the men at the top of the hierarchy, have a moustache that covers the whole of their mouth. Now that's interesting, isn't it? Because this is written by someone who actually saw them. Because of course we don't have a photograph of what they look like. We have to use these clues to try and picture what they look like in our mind. Okay, so we're going to look at some more evidence today. And when we finish looking at the evidence, you might want to go and watch or go onto the BBC website where they've got lots of lovely information about the Celts. There's a fact file there. So if you want to, at the end of today's lesson, you can have a look at that. Okay, now on Classroom Dojo, I've posted this sheet. Now today we're going to be looking at the Celts and how they lived. You already know a little bit about the Romans, but we'll be doing that another lesson. We're going to be looking at the Celts today, and we're going to be thinking about how they lived, kind of housing they lived in, how they travelled about, the kind of clothing that they wore. We've already had a look at that, haven't we? And the types of things they might have eaten and drunk, and anything else that we find out about them. So you could use this today to jot down some of your ideas. Okay, let's start off then. So here's our first page of evidence. Now, each page of evidence here has a letter. So you could say, when you're writing today, evidence A tells me, and you can write down what it tells me. So if we look at this first picture here, it's quite similar to the pictures we looked at yesterday in geography, doesn't it? Here we can see a Celtic settlement. This is how they lived. Look what you can see here. It's very rural. Do you remember that word, rural? It means it's in the countryside. This is not a town, is it? This is not a city. It's a small village or hamlet. And look, they've got only a few houses. Can you find out what those houses are called? That's a little challenge for you. What else did it tell us? Well, you can see that there's this mound again. Do you remember from yesterday what that man-made mound was called? That's right, it's called a motte. And so why is that useful for us? What is it useful for them? Why have they got these walls or this wall around their settlement? So what evidence can you get from this? Evidence B shows us, oh, a road. Doesn't look like our roads, does it? So what can you guess from this? Use your detective thinking here. Ah, now this is interesting. We've seen this picture already, haven't we? This is what they looked like, but this is quite interesting. What does this tell us? Do you remember what the Roman historian said? Can you see what's going on with his hair here? He's got a moustache. What did that tell us? But he's also got this blue markings all over his body. I'm going to set you a little challenge, almost as a piece of other homework. Can you find out what they wrote and drew all over themselves, the Celts, and why they did it? Picture C shows us some of the foods they kind of eat. You might recognise some of these foods because we eat similar things nowadays, don't we? E, G and F give you more information. Now G is a piece of primary evidence here. This is some jewellery. What does that tell us about the Celts, the fact they wore jewellery? Okay, so as you fill in your sheet today, you're going to want to go to the parts of the video and pause and fill in the information. Okay, so look at this section now and pause the video and fill in as much as you can on your sheet. Well done. Now go to these sets of evidence and do the same. done. Right, now you could go and watch this video, couldn't you? Now on this website, there is lots of information, there's lots of pictures, and you might be able to find out a little bit more about the Celts. On the BBC website, you might find some videos about the Celts. If I find any, I'll post them on Classroom Dojo so you can have a look at them. But you might find them first. Okay, so I look forward to reading what you found out today and hearing about it when we meet on our classroom Zoom later on. Have a good afternoon, Year 4.